Jill Colvin is a White House reporter for the Associated Press, joining me from the White House North Lawn. Hey, Jill. So if the president did dictate that initial statement that Donald Trump Jr. gave to the New York Times, why is that of consequence? Why is that of pertinence?
Well, thanks very much for having me. I mean, if it turns out to be accurate that the president personally dictated a statement, firstly, I mean, that's quite extraordinary in itself, the president himself dictating a statement about his son. But if he chose to characterize it inaccurately, then you have a problem here of the president trying to misportray the actual content of this meeting. I think it's also notable, the president, we'd reported earlier, had signed off on this statement, which was crafted during the flight home from Germany. He was there for the G20 World Leaders Summit. And that was the same summit where the president met with and spoke with President Putin of Russia several times. One of the topics the president said the two of them discussed was this very adoption program.
Okay, but this is not the first time that a president has spun something or a piece of information, and this was his own son we were talking about. Are we talking about any legal issues that are being brought up?
I mean, I don't think that there's any legal issues in a statement that you issue to the press. But I mean, I think what's really interesting here is that you have a president who really does believe that he is his best spokesperson. You know, he's constantly making policy pronouncements using his Twitter account. He has a very long history of calling up reporters, trying to spin them, even pretending, impersonating to be a spokesman, that, you know, claiming that it was somebody with a different name calling when it was really Donald Trump calling before he was president.
Right.
So this is something that he really has a history of liking to do.
Mm-hmm. How much of the damage the Trump administration is experiencing regarding specifically the Russia investigation is really self-inflicted at this point?
I mean, I think critics of the president and even some people in the White House would make a very strong case that the president is not helping himself with the way that he is tweeting about it, the statements that he makes to respond to it, that he's really only making things worse when he constantly says things like calling this a witch hunt, bringing the topic up, even on the rare day when it's not kind of the story leading the conversation.
Yeah. The White House Communications Director, Anthony Scaramucci, of course, is out after just 10 days. What finally convinced the president to drop him?
I mean, our understanding of this is, you know, the president decided to bring on a new chief of staff, John Kelly. His first day was Monday. He was sworn in Monday morning, and he really came in and made clear that things were going to be operating differently. Scaramucci was the first staffer to feel what that means. In addition to that staffing change, he also really restructured the White House, and at least, you know, what they're saying now is that this is going to operate like a much more traditional White House, with staffers, everyone from Chief Strategist Steve Bannon to the president's son-in-law Jared Kushner, now reporting to the Chief of Staff instead of the president directly.
What else can we expect to be different under General Kelly's leadership? In an article that you wrote for the Associated Press, you gave a specific anecdote about Kelly that may give us some insight into his relationship with President Trump and how it might be different than others we've seen.
So Kelly is somebody with a very long, very decorated military history, but he's someone who's really not afraid to stand up and voice his opinions respectfully when he disagrees. And we'd heard about this incident that happened a couple of weeks ago when Kelly was still the Homeland Security Secretary, where he disagreed with something the president was saying. The president was taking issue with the fact that the United States was allowing people, citizens from all these different countries, from Haiti to Afghanistan, other countries, allowing those people into the country. And he thought that made him look bad. Kelly calmly explained to him that there were legitimate reasons why people from these nations traveled to the United States. You know, some might be green card holders, some might be here to see family, for employment. The president was resistant to that message, and Kelly actually asked that everyone else leave the room so that he could confront the president directly, and folks standing outside could hear a very heated discussion between the two. So I think that story really illustrates that you now have a chief of staff who is willing to challenge the president. Now, the question is, how much challenging President Trump actually wants. You know, we've seen over the last 24 hours, the president has clearly not reined in his Twitter account at all. That's continuing. And we'll really see whether, you know, the president wants to actually follow through with, for instance, the chain of command I was talking about before, whether the president is actually going to follow those rules and let Kelly take some control, because it's taking control away from him.
Yeah, Trump being Trump, as they say. So the White House, of course, couched all of this in terms of a clean slate when they announced that Scaramucci was leaving yesterday. Is anyone else at this point in danger of losing their job in the West Wing?
I mean, at this point, we have not heard of any other departures. You know, Anthony Scaramucci, when he came in for his very short-lived job, made a point of saying that he wanted to fire. He was willing to fire people. He was willing to clean house. We have not heard that same language directly out of Kelly. We haven't heard from Kelly personally yet. And so it's really yet to be seen. And it's also yet to be seen whether they're going to and how quickly they're going to choose to fill that now vacant role of communications director. It's a role that has sat vacant several times during this administration. Sean Spicer, the outgoing press secretary, was filling in for quite a while. So we'll have to see how they choose to fill that role.
Wait, so Spicer is still there?
Spicer is still in the building. He said when he announced his resignation that he planned to stick around through the end of August to help with the transition. Reince Priebus also said the same thing, that he planned to stick around for a couple of weeks to help with the transition. So you have this very interesting dynamic where you have incomers, you have people on their way out, all working in the same building. It's a really interesting dynamic.
Interesting, to say the least. Jill Colvin at the White House. Thanks, Jill.
Thanks for having me.